Their attractiveness and confidence derive from the way she framed them, giving them the dignity of centrality within a full and often beautiful frame, the way she drew from them a strong gaze and composure. She typically shot from below. These photographs are examples of the opposite, but she did typically shoot from below, partly because when she wasn't using a tripod, she had the kind of camera that you hold at your waist and look down into, but partly very deliberately because she used that angle to enhance her subject's stature. Her photographs are not only lovely, but they're also easy. They are easy to read and understand. Her photography was in many ways very conventional. Her designs and images remained well inside the vernacular, commercial, and Christian visual culture of the time. Her aesthetic was so grounded in the traditional that the photographs could be satisfying even as they evoked intense responses. And these contradictions, I think, gave her work dynamism and energy. Just like her rich San Francisco subjects, these farm workers are usually somewhat reserved. They don't expose themselves. They're not simple. To appreciate this vision, we need to keep in mind how rarely American whites at this time saw respectful images of people of color, and how widely circulated were ugly caricatures of blacks and other non-whites. Lange's work might have had more effect on our culture had these photographs been distributed in proportion to those of whites. Lange tried not just to dignify people of color, but also to expose racism as a relationship. And in this, I think she achieved less. This particular image of a Mississippi plantation owner and his sharecroppers is one of her most successful in exposing power, because, as you can see, it so precisely aligns its spatial relations to its social relations. The man with power is standing in front in a very aggressive posture with his foot on the bumper of his automobile. His sharecroppers are fading into the back. But this kind of thing was much, much harder to illustrate because racism is not always a visual thing. It is an intangible thing. She actually tried to sell her boss on one large project that might have broken through this limitation. She proposed a photography series on the poll tax in the South and those disfranchised by it. Her boss would have none of this, and he thought, probably quite correctly, that if he tried something like that, it would make powerful Southern Democratic politicians absolutely determined to crush the photography project. Nowhere was Lange's anti-racism more visible than in her uniquely courageous work during World War II. Shortly after Imperial Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt ordered the relocation of all Japanese Americans, regardless of their citizenship, relocation to internment camps. The U.S. Army hired Lange to document the program photographically. She did this photography under very difficult conditions. Despite hiring her, the Army put many limits on what she could photograph. And as the brass began to sense her hostility to this imprisonment of 120,000 people, they began to harass her as she worked. She was even willing to desert her usual compositional artiness to show some of the reality of the camps. She must have known that the Army brass would never allow these photographs to be seen. As it happened, Lange's assistant in this project is still alive, and when I interviewed her, discussing the fact that these photographs had all been impounded by the Army, I said, why did she make such photographs? Didn't she imagine that the Army wouldn't like them? And her photograph, Christina Gardner, said, what else was there to show? To understand the meaning of this, you have to understand how nearly universal was the support for this internment policy, from the political right all the way to the political left. One commentator in California said that you could count on the fingers of your hand the number of white people who spoke out against this internment. The Communist Party, which had fought so hard against racism against blacks, not only supported the internment, but expelled all of its Asian American members. The city of San Francisco removed Japanese American children from its schools. There were hysterical fears about the Japanese invasion of California. Lange's approach to these people, though, to the extent that she could, was the same as in all her portraiture. She showed the ghastly living conditions in the camps, but she also tried to make portraits of the people. She showed them as worthy of respect, as dignified, as complex, as thoughtful, but never as stereotypes. She continued this concern for people of color toward the end of her life when she accompanied her husband, Paul Taylor, to Asia at a time when he was a consultant on agricultural policy for the State Department. There she was handicapped by her inability to get close enough to make portraits. She could not speak their language. She could not safely wander in the streets. She did not understand their culture. So here she began to do something extraordinary. She transformed her subject matter and adapted her technique to photograph exactly her distance from these people, her inability to get close to them. There are many images of veiled women, of course, the logical symbol for that kind of inability to be able to see people. But she also took many other portraits, even of people who looked at her angrily, of children who ran away from her. One result was that her take on these people, especially these women, was colored by a certain kind of Orientalism, a certain fascination with their exoticness that can be somewhat disturbing. And that approach to women might seem part of Lange's overall view of gender if you listen to her words. What she said in interviews and in her journals always seemed completely to follow the most conventional, traditional views of gender. She identified women's primary destiny with family and children. She singled out women's tremendous skill at housekeeping and at keeping their homes beautiful. This was the vision that dominated New Deal art in general. But I want to suggest that Lange's photographs actually belied her statements, and that her populism was several degrees less masculinist than that of the typical New Deal. This is one example. This, of course, is a part of another aspect of Lange's work that you see a lot, her absolute fascination with modernist composition, because this is in many ways a modernist abstraction, although it is also a picture of a woman who is a cotton picker who is lifting what often were 100-pound sacks of cotton. If you read the publications of the Department of Agriculture at that time, they divided their constituency into farmers and farmers' wives. Lange saw them as male and female farmers. She photographed men and women with equal affection, but she never allowed the audience to let women recede into their homes and children.